The college football playoff bubble is a thing now since we're putting 12 teams in here, which means a bunch of people are wondering, will my resume stack up? Will Tennessee's resume stack up? That's one of the first things I wondered the other night. They're the number 7 team in the country right now. I've got a question. What does a loss to Georgia do to Tennessee? What does a loss do? Let's just, for the sake of argument, say that they lose to Georgia, and that's the only other loss they have. They've got a loss at Arkansas, a loss at Georgia. They're a 10-2 team. I would guess they don't go to Atlanta. For the sake of argument, let's say they don't go. What are we looking at here? Well, we're looking at a team that beat Alabama, firstly, and therefore we were probably going to always be looking at a team that got compared to Alabama. Now, there are a million different variables in the equation. What I'm paying attention to is there is a world we could get to where Alabama, let's say, they win out. Let's say Tennessee's got 2 losses, Bama's got 2 losses. The old protocol is if teams are thought to be comparable, head-to-head record is supposed to be the deciding factor. And therefore, if Alabama and Tennessee are viewed as comparable and Tennessee's got the head-to-head win, that's supposed to default Tennessee above Alabama. What I wonder, if Tennessee has a second loss, and one of those losses is Arkansas, the other loss is Georgia, do people look at the games you've lost if it comes head-to-head, Bama, Tennessee, or do people look at the games you've won? Because if they look at the games you've won, as bad as that Vandy loss kind of could be considered for Bama, they will have had wins at LSU that have a win against Georgia. Like, they'd have some really good-looking wins. So South Carolina's a pretty good win as well. So I wonder, in other words, if there is a world where the committee looks at Bama's resume, 2 losses, Tennessee's 2 losses, and they think Bama's unequivocally a better resume and head-to-head never enters the equation. That's an open-ended question for me. I'm actively wondering how the committee will handle that. Notre Dame right now, kind of looked at where they were placed the other night, and I thought, that Northern Illinois game is very visible. That Northern Illinois loss is inexcusable. It should matter. It should very much matter. I remember Fornelli, when they lost that game, I remember listening to one Tom Fornelli just yell, I hate that we're living in a world where you could lose a game like that and still be alive in the playoff discussion. And he and I are cut from the same cloth when it comes to our beliefs on the playoffs. So I agree with him, but we can't change it. So we do have the format we have. The committee looks like they're yelling at Notre Dame, that loss is going to matter. It's going to be a weight tied to your ankle. However, you're not dead. You're not dead. You got wins against A&M. You got a win against Louisville. That's all well and good. However, USC's killing them right now. Florida State's killing them right now. Once upon a time, we looked earlier in the year at Notre Dame's schedule and we said, well, whatever happens early in the season, they'll have an opportunity against a highly ranked Florida State. They'll have an opportunity against a highly ranked USC. No, you won't, and no, you won't. Army of all teams, is their only remaining ranked opponent, and I don't know what Army will be by the time they play them. I've got no issue with that, though. You lose to Northern Illinois at home, I got no issue. You ought to be very, very perfect and still possibly have your fate not totally in your hands. Now, in the world of power ratings, you guys know I got Notre Dame 5th in the country. So a lot of times I have teams lower, like Brigham Young, for example. I may have them lower, but I'll tell you, if I were ranking teams, I'd have them higher. Well, with Notre Dame, I've got Notre Dame power rated way up there. But if I were ranking them, I would not have them that high. So it goes both ways. Then we get to SMU and Brigham Young. Let me talk about Brigham Young first. So they're undefeated right now. In fact, Brigham Young's sitting here undefeated right now. Talking to FanDuel earlier today, and I was just looking at some of the markets they're offering. I got some advice to you. If you're a BYU believer, if you're a BYU backer, you think they finished the season undefeated, over at FanDuel right now, they've got odds on teams to finish undefeated. There are 4 of them left: Oregon, Miami, Brigham Young, Indiana. And right now, if you believe in Brigham Young, you can get them at plus 400 to finish the season undefeated, the regular season. So go 12-0. If you think that's going to happen, plus 400. But what I wanted to know, I hit David and the traders up. I said, could you give me the lines as it stands right now on their remaining games? They're not publicly available to be bet on. However, I just wanted to have an idea, because I suspected they'd be favored in all these games, and they would be. They play Utah this Saturday. You can bet that game right now. They're favored by 3.5. They got Kansas at home. Brigham Young minus 6.5 right now, hypothetically. They go to Arizona State. Right now, they'd be a short 1.5-point favorite against the Sun Devils, even on the road. And then they'd welcome in Houston at home to end the year. They'd be about a 10.5-point favorite against Houston. So they're favored as of now in all 4 remaining games. They're technically favored to be undefeated, if you want to look at it that way. There's another argument that says that's not the way you should look at favorability over the span of multiple games. But nevertheless, if you think they're going undefeated, you can get them plus 400 right now. So I'm looking at them. I'm looking at SMU, currently in the driver's seat themselves for a conference championship berth. I keep hearing everyone tell me they're not going to punish losing in the conference title game. Why? Because we have to incentivize the conference championship game. Conference title games have to mean something. And I'm like, okay, I'm on board with that logic. Therefore, I don't doubt if Georgia were to lose in Atlanta, that they'd still be in the playoff. I don't doubt that. I don't doubt if Oregon were to lose or Ohio State were to lose in Indianapolis, that they'd still be in the playoff. I don't doubt that. But I do strongly doubt what you guys will do with Brigham Young if they go undefeated and then they lose in the conference title game. Are you dropping them? You dropping them? And then here's a really big conundrum. SMU is not undefeated. They got a loss, ironically, to BYU. They've got a loss right now. It's out of conference. So they've got a loss. So what if SMU stays winning the rest of the way? What if SMU goes to Charlotte, they play Miami and they lose, and they finish with 2 losses? One of them was in the conference title game. Are you guys looking at me and seriously saying if SMU were to enter conference championship Saturday ranked 10th, but then they lost their second game, that you wouldn't drop them out? I'm openly calling BS on that with the committee. You will have to prove me wrong on that. I think you guys absolutely would drop them out. I'd be happy to be proven wrong. We'll see. How many SEC and Big Ten teams are going to make this thing? My best guess would be 4 SEC teams right now. I'm pretty locked in on 3 Big Ten teams. My best guess would be 4 SEC teams, and if not 4, then 5. I think 5 is more likely than 3. It kind of comes down to Indiana, and I'll talk about them in a second. Indiana could grab one of these spots sort of out of nowhere. The Big 12 and the ACC conference championship situation could delve into chaos, because if Brigham Young is undefeated and they go play a 1 or 2 loss or whatever, Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game, and they lose, well, the team they lost to's in. But if BYU doesn't drop out of the top 12, they're also in, so that grabs up a spot. Same thing could happen with the whole SMU versus Miami thing. So there's a lot still up in the air. I think either 4 or 5 SEC teams. That would be my guess right now. How messy is the SEC going to get? There are a lot of scenarios. Like when we first made this thing, a lot of people looked around and they said, well, the SEC conference championship game, I mean, it's pretty cut and dry. The winner will get a first-round bye, and the loser will be, like the 5 or 6 seed. Yeah, that's because you applied prior logic to a current situation. Prior logic was it's just Georgia, Bama in the SEC title game all the time, and they're undefeated or 1 loss max. And that's really cut and dry. That's really clean. Well, this year it could be chaotic. Just one example here. I'm not going to throw all of them at you. One example. There could be a logjam of 2-loss conference teams in the SEC, and you got 2 losses versus 2 losses in Atlanta, and someone loses their 3rd game. Well, are you punishing both of them? Are you punishing the loser of the SEC title game who incurs their 3rd loss? No one kind of expected that to be the resume. But I'll throw one at you. Let's say Texas A&M. Right now, a 2-loss team. One of those losses is out of conference. So let's say A&M wins the rest of the way until the Texas game. They lose that one. That would make them a 2-loss team in conference, 3-loss team overall. Some random tiebreaker could send A&M to Atlanta. I think you know where I'm going with this. That would be a 9-3 Texas A&M team in Atlanta. And they lose in Atlanta, which is their 4th loss. How do you handle them? Do they drop from where they were ranked going into that weekend? Whether they were in the top 12 or not, do they drop? Do they get punished for losing a 4th game just because it's the conference title game? My point is, it could get a whole lot messier, even in the SEC conference championship picture, because here's what I'd yell. If I were A&M and I were in that situation, and I go and I suffer my 4th loss in Atlanta, that's one way to look at it. One way to look at it is very simple. Josh, you can't have a 4-loss team in the playoff. I get it. But here's the follow-up. What A&M should shout right back in your face, and what Greg Sankey would probably hand them the mic to yell, would be, you're telling us we were the second best team in the SEC, but we're not good enough to make a 12-team playoff? In what world does that make sense? You're actively telling us we shouldn't have scheduled Notre Dame. You're just telling us we should have scheduled McNeese. And if we scheduled McNeese, then we'd have one less loss, and we just are what our record says we are, apparently. Gets messy. And the Indiana protocol, of course, is basically the committee the other night, they were so hospitable. Indiana knocked on the door, and the committee said, it's Indiana. What do we do? Tell them to come in. And then Indiana comes in, and they say, welcome, Indiana. Stand right over here. Stand on this rug. And Indiana stands on the rug. And then when no one's looking, they look under the rug, and there's just a trap door under the rug. Everyone's waiting for the Ohio State game, so that if they lose, they'll press the button, and Indiana will be gone and done with, and they can say, we gave them a chance. They didn't hold up their end of the deal. But I have a question for you guys. Has anyone considered that Indiana could lose to Michigan but beat Ohio State? What happens then? What happens if Indiana just loses this weekend to Michigan? It'd be pretty wild, but not impossible. They lose this weekend, and they turn the ball over 5 times or something like that. Then they go to Columbus, and they're +2 turnovers, and they win. And they got one of the best wins in the conference. How do you handle them then? I don't know. Playoff bubble, huh? I'd pop it in a millisecond if I could, but I can't.